so proud of you. Welcome everybody to the all Alternative Blacks podcast. All
We're gonna
Black
go all American.
Alternatives.
The All Black Alternatives podcast.
All Black Alternatives cast pod. Um, full disclosure, had 1.5 beers.
1.5.
1.5, and they weren't even that crazy. 1.5 beers prior to this, but I have not had any food because we decided to cook risotto on a Thursday, and time got away from
It's going to
us.
take a while.
Yeah, time got away from us. And you know what's crazy about this risotto? There's no wine and there's no cheese.
Oh, cheese. So are you making a risotto?
And I'm perplexed. Perplexed, to say the least. But it smells good.
There you go.
That's like half the battle, right?
This is true.
No. All right. So on today's episode, we are going to be looking into the MLB officially adopting the stats of the Negro League and how this has affected some of the league leaders in certain statistics of all time. So this includes some single season, some lifetime, statistics, but it definitely reshapes the game of baseball in a way. Nothing in terms of how it is played, but it does reshape the trajectory of it. It does change what is included in the past, and I think there are various topic points to talk about today, and I'm very excited to get into that conversation with you. But before we get into any of that,
wine. Oh wait, beer.
Wine's after the show. That's what I'll be enjoying the risotto with, since we're not putting it in.
Wait, what?
Since we're not putting wine in the risotto, we will be enjoying wine with the risotto.
Very nice.
Because you are not going to deprive me.
Of beer?
Of anything. What are you drinking, Chris?
Today I am drinking Ringmaster.
Oh, fat lady.
Brewing. It's a German-style Pilsner. This one is 5% on the nose. And it's a really good one, I think.
Yeah. I do want to get your opinion on it. You did not go, but you did get beer from Fat Lady. And so I kind of want to hear a little bit about the beers that you have had the opportunity to have from them and what your initial impression of it is. I know Alyssa did go, so maybe the shared impression that she has shared with you.
So the impression is, my impression is I've had this Pilsner. I had a Golden Lager.
Okay.
And an IPA.
It's good.
And all three I felt were solid. Just solid beers. I think the Golden Lager was probably my favorite of the three.
Okay.
But yeah, I think it's like a solid 3.754.
Okay, so it's a little bit below a 4.
Yeah, if I had the Insider Untapped or whatever it's called, Untapped Premium Plus, I would actually give this maybe like a 3.9. Like just coming in right up.
It's close, but not a 4. I get it. Okay, and so a 3.75 might not accurately describe it as well as it really is, but it's like a hair removed from the round up, so unfortunately you have to round out.
Correct. It's like Here's what I would say. I would say like this is a 4 to slightly above 4 on a nice hot day, but is it the first? Is it? It's just another German Pilsner, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So like, if it wasn't like it's hot and it's hot and I really need this crisp lager right now, then but right now in this weather, it's hitting.
Hitting. Just like, never mind.
You have any
I thought I was gonna
Pilsner glass?
transition into to the league leaders, but I don't think we're ready to jump into the conversation yet. Um,
Yeah, yeah, you left early.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I got picked off.
What are you drinking there, Northern Brewer?
I am drinking. There's no crying in baseball from Evil Genius. Philly themed. I thought I was going to, keep it in baseball if I could. If I wasn't able to, I was going to keep it on lager spectrum because I just feel like lagers are, hand in hand with baseball. And
True. Lenny, I
so,
was gonna go first. The Slugger from Sly Fox.
yeah, I think I did that last time we talked about baseball and
I
stuff
think you're
like
right.
that. Um, so I originally went to Sacred Vice, which is on Berks and Front, a little past Berks and Front, but anyway, uh, they they're in the process of changing locations. They have their brewery there now, and so a good problem that they're having because their beer is really good is that they're trying to keep up with demand. So they're just trying to get a stockpile of beer available. And they're trying to, get their lagering system figured out so that they can produce more lagers. And so they're worrying about these two things first. Once they get the lagering fixed, set, and they get everything ready to go, that's when they'll finally start working on the canning and getting that available. But right now, they're just trying to make sure that everybody has beer. So they're not even doing growlers or crowlers or anything like that either, which is cool, which is solid. It's a good problem to have. And that's
Yeah.
really exciting. Not only that, but now they're also selling hot dogs. And because they are on Berks Street, they are selling Berks hot dogs. And so it's
So
just one of those situations where you just really love to see somebody lean into, where they're at, what it's all about. And I'm very happy with this location and what they're doing. With that being said, went there. Disappointing to not be able to walk away with anything, but Evil Genius is up the street, and so grab some stuff from there. And that's why there's no crying in baseball. Because I could cry over the fact that I couldn't get beer, but there is beer.
so you didn't have to cry.
Oh, I'm still crying.
What's the rating on this?
Now that I'm back at it, it's a hazy mango IPA, and I am just not here for it. It actually is a little light. It feels like a little watered down from other juicy IPAs, especially when you're just down the street from Other Half, who is really good at making hazy IPAs. As much as we talk about hazy IPA fatigue, if you're going to call it that, you might as well step into it.
Certainly.
It's a New England in a very weird way. It says natural mango flavor and a wicked curveball, and the natural flavor may be true. Because it is lighter, it's not as heavy on that juice that you're used to, but you're also missing some of the hoppy elements that you might be wanting to get out of it then. No
Yeah.
natural hop flavoring really comes from this to kind of aid the mango light version of what I am getting, and therefore
They
it's not a good rating from me. I don't think I'm even going to say anything because
okay.
you might be able to
Unrated.
color me unimpressed with this.
Color me unimpressed.
It says hazy and
What
refreshing. This beer knocks it out of the park with a hefty dose of dry hops and natural mango flavor. You could say it's a league of its own.
it seems as though they didn't hop it much during the brew to get some of that bitterness in there.
No,
Is what if it's all dry hopped? What type of hop is it? Does it
it
say?
it doesn't. Um, Probably Citra.
If you had to guess, fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember. I'm sure I've had a no. There's no crying in baseball long ago. But I couldn't recall or tell you.
It's definitely not one of those that I reach for. I see it. I like the name. I think Evil Genius is amazing in that regard. They make very memorable names of beers, but there's also a reason why I only really reach for Evil Genius on very like particular occasions. I'm always waiting for Han Shot first, you know. Um, and then from there, it's like I actually am struggling with finding some other beers that I get really excited about.
I think you're right. I think there are like those couple that are just like iconic, I guess, classic. And maybe it's a little bit of nostalgia too in that sense, but yeah, you're right. I feel that.
Yeah.
So
So
here you are just taking what the pitcher's giving you. Taking it the other way with it.
just working what we're being given. Yeah, exactly. So before we get into the Negro League stats being implemented, which I think it's fair to just make the announcement here too. You know, this wasn't brand new. Like this doesn't like get dropped within like the past week or a couple of weeks as a very shocking news piece. They've been working to figure out how to implement it since 2020. That was a thing that they've been looking at. That's what they've been doing is working on the stats. I think they've made it through about 75% of the statistics, but enough to solidify and say with enough conviction that yes, this is where where these players are going to fall, and with enough
Yeah.
conviction to say that for a lot of players that end up pushing some all-time greats out of certain conversations. And that's what we'll be getting into. I know you have the stats up. I have one of the articles up as well, and we'll look a little into that nuance. But I think you have a sample for us.
I do. I potentially have two, and one is the sure shot here. So I'm
Beastie
gonna do
Boys.
that one. No,
Damn.
no, it's got to be the sure shot. No, just kidding. Um, this sample is Fragments of Crystal, Giovanni Cristiani
Lupe Fiasco,
from 19.
Crystal Palaces.
No, from 1985, and here we go. Once this loads, as
Was
always.
that Rick and Morty?
What the here we go. Is that Rick and Morty? I don't
Yeah.
know.
It's the episode when they're in all the different like timelines, like the times shifted out of sync.
Okay, I vaguely recall the episode, but not enough to be able to recall lines. I need to watch. Here we go.
It's the chimes though. Obviously, that's the sample, and that's what's throwing me. Is it not the chimes?
No, you're 100% right. I guess you classify that as chime. More like a xylophone.
Yeah, but a xylophone has the chime like
Yeah,
wind
it's
chimey.
a
Like
high-pitched percussion.
now, there's part of me that feels like someone's gonna come out of nowhere, and I don't think this is correct. But there's part of me that feels like I'm about to hear Maybach music.
Sorry.
Whoa, what was that?
Oh my God, Randy Orton from out of nowhere.
I feel like
It's not Randy Orton.
Maybach music was about to be said after the chant. But I honestly, it's probably, and this happens every time we play this game. You're gonna tell me what it is, and I'm gonna like be so mad that I couldn't get it.
You're really going to be mad about this one, I think.
Okay, let's hear it.
Super. All right. You want to just play the song?
Yeah, play the song.
All right. Here we load. It can't just have it can't just be ready.
It's just
It's
on
got to
deck.
load up.
It's on deck.
Yeah. All right, we'll stop it on a sports related line.
And you know what's funny? I almost wore my Brown jersey.
That would have been ironic.
Yeah. But Danny Brown, yeah, that's a great beat for him. That made sense as soon as you played it. It just like it clicked, you know?
Like it's a unique beat.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it was like it's on the tip. I know it's like it's right there
Yeah.
on the tip of your tongue.
And it's funny, like so the only other person that I could really see being successful on a beat like that is Mr. I'm biracial.
Logic.
As soon as I started playing, I was like, it sounds like Logic, but there's no way Chris is coming up with a Logic song. Like he's not bringing that on like into the batter's box.
I got a few in the vault for Logic.
Okay.
One of these days.
Yeah, just waiting in the bullpen.
It's in. Yeah, it's on deck, maybe even, or maybe or even in the hole.
Ooh, okay. In the hole is a good one because I already said the on deck joke. So in the hole is really good.
See, we're right here. I do want to try this second sample just because I feel like this one you're going to appreciate way more.
All right.
But I have not pre-prepped this, so I don't know how good the sample is or if this is the actual correct song because I don't recognize this art. So we're gonna just have a little fun and see what the heck happens. I'm not even gonna name. I'm just gonna play this and see what happens. But if it is correct, you'll see why.
Okay.
I'm trying to do this one. It's just.
Jay-Z, obviously. Brooklyn, we go hard. BROOKLYN. Come again. I Jack, I Rob, I
You know why I picked this
song? Oh man, I'm Jackie Robinson.
That's one of those Jay-Z.
But no, so that's actually a really interesting, and I think that's a perfect segue into today's conversation, right? Because when we talk about black players in baseball, especially in Major League Baseball, in Major League in the way that we know it uh, as the MLB, we think of the first player to break the color barrier. I guess it's very important to make that distinction. Not the first black major league player, but the first black major league player to break the barrier that had been created is Jackie Robinson.
Right.
And so I think that's a really good way to break into this conversation, to talk about the history and the impact that it made for Jackie Robinson to be able to get drafted, by, well, not drafted, but signed by the Brooklyn Dodgers to uh, play for Montreal, get brought up to the major leagues, and then all of the things that he had to overcome to be one of the best players to ever grace the game and to do some like really incredible things. But even then, what the conversation around when there's a movie made after, like, about him, 42, when we see Jackie Robinson Day and everybody wearing 42, there's a lot of conversations around that kind of marry the conversation that we're going to have today. So I think it'll be very easy to have the conversation about the stats being integrated and kind of compare and contrast what we have seen happen in terms of the respect and the kind of the way to acknowledge the impact that Jackie Robinson had, and what the impact and potential influence bringing these stats as part of the official stats into the MLB has and kind of implies. So I guess my thing for you is, where do you want to start? What is your initial reaction? Do you want to talk about how that felt, or do you want to talk about what this means in terms of some of these stats? I'm going to kind of let you start this off.
Okay. I would say that it was exciting. I think it's been a long time coming, obviously. And even back then, it was always thought that the Negro League was this inferior, like minor league type of league in terms of talent. Yet almost any player that transitioned into the major leagues after Jackie Robinson were had great major league careers.
Oh, and a lot of times at a point where their prime was well past them.
Yeah, like so I think Satchel Paige didn't get into the MLB till he was close to 40,
Yeah,
and he was still had good seasons after that. So, I do think it's appropriate because the knock when you're talking about like a league that isn't the current league being integrated into the current league is, oh well, they didn't play the talent or they didn't play these players. But those players before integration didn't play any of the black players either
right. And
to
and
gain these.
yeah, and to be fair, as far back as the MLB stats went, it was coinciding with these statistics. So either I think what you end up saying is, you either don't count anything prior. You say once everything was integrated and everything was, I won't even call it even Steven, but like, for lack of a better term, like once everything was even and fair and allowed to play, that's where you continue stats, and anything prior to that has to go away. Or you have to kind of say, like, because I don't even believe, so like the crazy thing too is what I was seeing a lot of times where people, well, they played a shorter season, it didn't count, blah blah blah. The way they're bringing the stats in too isn't directly from the season, right? Like, they're not saying, oh, here was their season, and this is the stat that's coming through. They're actually using like a weighted scale to bring those stats in to create
Yeah, and also like at this point, and that's the other like at this point with advanced analytical stats in baseball,
Mhm.
That type of stuff, because the season's changed a million times. No, like Babe Ruth didn't play 162 games a season.
Well, even playoffs have changed in recent years. So what are you gonna
Nah,
say? Like
yeah.
stats
Well,
don't count
like
anymore?
I think what most of the Yankees World Series, like they didn't play all of these different series and then win the World Series. It's like they were winning. A lot of those were back when you won your quote unquote league and then you played the winner from the other league. And it was just you're the better team. You only really have to play one series.
Right.
So a lot of these things we can be arbitrary with what we keep or don't keep. So if we're gonna keep it all this other stuff, then we have to keep this stuff.
Right. Like the
Um,
purists, like there's no such thing as a purist, right? Because baseball is such a growing game.
yeah, like there was a dead ball era, there was a steroid
The
era. You had,
right.
they had the pitching mound was lowered from some of the years that some of these great pitchers had, which significantly reduces the effectiveness of pitchers. So
Because
like there's all these
science.
different change. What's that?
Because science.
Well, if you're coming downhill more, anyway,
No, you're
there's all
absolutely correct.
there's all these other things you can point to, but the bottom line is you have you have the people who came into the MLB, like you said many times, outside of their prime and still performed well against the MLB talent. And then you also have like even when segregation was in place, you had all these different MLB stars playing with the Negro League stars, like in exhibition games over the summer and stuff. And a lot of them would tell you that these guys are legitimate. These guys are really good.
Okay, so like when the Negro League was playing these teams, because what kind of what you just described, right? So essentially, the Negro League is a barnstormers league, which again got a tip off, like give a tip of the hat to Lancaster's baseball team for being called the Barnstormers, right? Which is
When
their
that's
they're below minor league. They're just a barn star, like whatever. Um, but that's what they kind of did. They went to wherever they could play, wherever the people were willing to kind of pay some money to, and they played whoever was willing to play them. And so another like kind of forgotten fact about the Negro League is it wasn't just black players, right? We're talking about black players. We're talking about white players. We're talking about Latin players. Like we're talking about just a very diverse group of players that were allowed to play and the teams that they played against, which included some of the same talent that was in Major League Baseball. And I think that is very true because when you look at some of the teams that they were playing, I believe the statistic of the Negro League versus sometimes Major League teams are very close to Major League teams against white teams. I think was how it was categorized. They had a winning percentage of like 51%. So over half the time they beat the other team.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean it's clearly it's clearly just one of those situations where they were the out group and so they weren't highlighted the same. Even though if you were there at the time and you weren't completely biased or racist, you would know how good the talent was. So all of this to say these statistics are legitimate. I'm glad they're validating this finally for baseball, as we know, is one of those old school traditionalist type sports um, where, the older people just don't want to let go of anything. Um, and so I think this is a big step forward in the right direction, regardless of what pushed it, what was the catalyst was to get it done now, whether it's, them trying to get more people invested in the league now since it is on the decline versus other professional sports leagues or whatever the case may be. I'm just glad it is here because when you look at some of the statistics that are getting added in, some of these leaderboards, really shift.
You want to go over some of
If
those?
Yeah, so I have it. This is Yahoo Sports pulled up here. These are a couple of the leader of the records um, that are now different. So, for example, career batting average, there are now five players inserted into the top six all time. Four players just below Ty Cobb, who's at 367 all time, and then Josh Gibson is the leader at
Who just
372.
killed shit.
And Josh Gibson, I guess, Josh Gibson was basically considered probably like the greatest Negro League player ever.
Yeah.
Um, so same thing, career slugging percentage. Babe Ruth is set first, was first on the list at 690, and Josh Gibson at a 718. So it completely blows them out of the water. Uh, Josh Gibson's also third now in career on base percentage, behind Ted Williams and Babe Ruth. Uh, on base plus slugging, Josh Gibson again has it over Ted Williams at Babe Ruth. Single season batting average, which is a big deal which was a big deal in old school stats. Josh Gibson again had the highest single season at 466. And in fact, one, two, three, four, six Negro League players get inserted into the top seven for highest single season batting average. These are like really big, and then it just keeps going and going. This one's an interesting one for single season on base percentage. Josh Gibson, Barry Bonds, Barry
Yep.
Bonds.
I was gonna say that is the one that Barry Bonds gets pushed out of.
No, he actually for the on base percentage, Barry Bonds 1, 2, got Josh Gibson 3, but then single season on base plus slugging, Josh
Mm.
Gibson 1 and 2, Barry Bonds third. So,
And
and then
the unfortunate thing there too is right. It's like okay, cool. So you see this guy. You can say for a lot of these different stats, right? Like oh well, like all these other things shouldn't make him be able to be there. But unfortunately, Barry Bonds, which is somebody that I definitely was like very fond of and loved to see him do well. You know, we love to see black athletes do very well in the sport, right? But then there comes, obviously the steroids, right?
right,
And so it's, you have players like him, you have players like Mark McGuire, right? Like who have these stats and they're tainted, right? In a certain complexity. But then you do also put it together with like, okay, but like Babe Ruth was hitting like sponges out of the park, like
yeah, 50-ounce bat.
50 ounce bat, like. You had these baseballs that were just clobbered to death and were like basically just were rubber balls, right? Like where do we make this like very like minute distinction between this stuff and then yet we're
Right.
arguing about oh well this league isn't comparable to this league.
Yeah, it for baseball specifically because of how old it is as a professional sport, you really can't make that argument because literally you speak about baseball eras to talk about stats like the dead ball era. You don't count those. You don't count like anything that wasn't before World Series were a thing, before integrate, like all these different things. So this is just another small change. That's a big change.
Huge.
The last big one on here was the ERA for pitchers. Satchel Paige now has the highest single season or third lowest
Yeah.
single season ERA, which is huge. So there's a bunch of other like adjustments to different notable players. Like Willie Mays gets more hits because he played a year in the
Yeah.
Negro League as well. Jackie Robinson gets more hits. Satchel Paige gets more wins. So there's a whole bunch of really cool things, and I kind of think this now kind of not completes like the history books, but it definitely recontextualizes the history books.
So I think this is where I would like to bring up a couple of different like viewpoints, right? So you have we kind of already alluded to it. We've talked about the viewpoint of like, well, it's like comparing apples to oranges. It's not the same league. It would be like bringing XFL stats or CFL stats into the NFL. I played softball. Should my stats be considered um, into baseball, right? And those type of things just kind of seem, I guess, in my view, a little with like the undertone of just like,
Have you seen those actual arguments?
yeah.
Have you?
I've seen these. Well, I've seen these comments. You know, like going through like the different like chats and whatever. Right. I have seen those verbatim, like these actual arguments as to why this is bullshit. That this is just another woke agenda. You know, all these other things. But I'm sure. Are you aware in 1969 there were six other leagues that were added into the statistics of these leadership boards for MLB stats, right?
I didn't know that.
Six other leagues, and that sometimes consumes like I think there's a union league. I think they're talking about like American National Leagues combining and all of that kind of stuff, right?
Right.
So there's six other instances that in 1969, and I think that's a very important year to like kind of conceptualize with that too, right? Six different leagues that they have said are going to count towards these stats. So this isn't even the first time that new statistics have come into who is on the leadership board, right? And I don't know. I wasn't around in 1969 to see what the initial blowback on that was, but that has happened. It isn't the first time, and some of these leagues kind of bleed into the same eras as the Negro League.
Mm-hmm.
And so adding a seventh isn't going to fucking break anything. And I think that's
No.
where like that like thin like mask of racism kind of still exists, and I don't think it's because people necessarily are aware of why they're so mad. I don't think that a lot of people understand why they're so frustrated with this, and in a lot of instances it doesn't change too much of who are the greatest players of all time. It just recognizes a few others.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you kind of see that with your example, right? Is people are saying, oh, it's like taking the XFL into the NFL. Well, no, the XFL are players who weren't talented enough to make the NFL.
Not that they
They
didn't
weren't
have
kept
the
in,
chance or
or
opportunity to do so.
they had ample chance to compete for a position in the NFL. They just didn't make it. Or they did something themselves off the field that got them in trouble and they needed to leave, right? Something like that. Completely different situation here. I would say this is, and it's not definitely not like a G League. I would say this is way more analogous to like the ABA and the
Mm-hmm.
NBA,
Yeah.
where the ABA was like the more black, more like hip and happening league, and they formed with the NBA, and it was kind of like that same thing. Well, the NBA is real basketball, and this,
Right.
you know, this is how it's real fundamental basketball, and they'll never be able to actually play. And then, you know, most of the greatest that were in the ABA were greats in the NBA, Dr. J and all that, and all the teams that came in. So it's like that's a thing, and it's the same thing with oh shoot, what's the other one? I just had or NFL, right? You had the NFL and you had the AFL,
Mm-hmm.
two completely different leagues, and they end up merging because the one is overtaking the other one, and the bigger one's like, well, we have to either join or start losing money,
Right.
right?
Which is what it
We
always
have to
comes down to.
recognize, yeah, we have to recognize that this product is just as good, and we have to do something about it now.
Mhm.
And so I think and that has nothing to do with race and the color barrier and all of these things that created like a further wall.
It's always one color that really comes down to it all, right?
Green.
Green. Regardless of how you feel, it always comes down to one thing, and it's going to be green. We live in this capitalistic society, and that's what's always going to be the thing going forward, right? So a lot of, I guess even to say that too, a lot of the ballparks that were being played on too back in the day for the Negro Leagues were owned by whites, right? And so depending on how that person felt, they might not want to like allow that to happen if their greed for like money wasn't enough. Like their greed for white superiority might out trump it, and then you wouldn't see them play. But again, what you saw was the MLB saw the popularity, saw the option onto what could happen if you brought in this Negro League. That you don't bring in the Negro League or like start to, because the rule was never actually written right for the MLB. It was never written that black players can't play in the Major League Baseball. It was written so that they couldn't play in minor league baseball, and so MLB got away with like, oh well, there was never a rule that they couldn't play Major League Baseball, but the farm system wouldn't let them do it, right? Okay, so you had that, but once you saw like Negro League actually being competitive in terms of taking money away, that's where you start to see a okay, let's see what happens if we like test this out by like Branch Rickey, right? Don't know if I got the name right, but anyway,
Yeah,
that,
I think so.
yeah, that's where you start seeing like this like trickle into Major League Baseball. And so the other argument then becomes not so much
Now let's
about,
explain. I get another beer.
yeah, the other argument becomes not so much about should these stats be allowed. It becomes, do we want them to be part of the statistics? Because the Negro League wasn't built because we wanted to be part of it, but because we weren't allowed to be. So it became its own monster and entity, not monster, its own entity, because it was like, we're not allowed to play here, we're going to play here. And so the other argument that I've been seeing out there, and then we'll talk about our new beers, was, bringing these stats into the MLB kind of whitewashes it, kind of Disneyfies it is the word I heard, kind of brings, does to the Negro League what has already happened to Jackie Robinson and Martin Luther King, right? It mellows them out. It dilutes them to the radicals that they actually were. And I know I have my thoughts on this, but before we get into any of that,
Second beer.
second beer. What are you drinking?
This is Daisy Cutter Select.
Ooh, those are nice. That's the Sierra Nevada collab.
Yeah, double IPA. Daisy Cutter. It is 8%.
I get it, Cutter, because baseball. Good job.
Didn't didn't even think about that. I would have started with this beer if I would have thought of that.
It's okay. I was just
Two.
throwing a
Yeah.
curve in there for you.
All right. We'll slide it on over to you to give your second beer.
Sorry, I'm just being a knucklehead.
More like a screwball.
Uh,
Okay.
But you know what we shouldn't talk about? Playoffs. We're talking about playoffs.
Well,
Uh,
that's NFL, though.
I know.
The wrong sport.
Um, Evil Genius, obviously. We got a couple from them. Playoffs is a hazy orange creamsicle IPA. I actually think this is better than the There's No Crying in Baseball. You get the creamy, orangey, hazy element of this IPA. Um, the other one was 6%. This one is sitting at a 7%. So it's a little higher. So a lot of that ABV is actually being hidden a lot better, and I think that's why there is a juicier element to it.
I just get iffy with creamsicle anything.
Yeah, there's some lactose being thrown into it.
Yeah, and I'm not going to tolerate it. See, it doesn't even look is does it have that milky taste to it? Because it doesn't look uh I don't know, from at least over the computer, it doesn't look like that really thick, pale.
So it's not thick. It's definitely not thick. Like they've done something if they were outrightly trying to do it, which I don't believe they were. If they were trying to create a creamsicle light version that was more approachable, I think they knocked it out of their park. And I think no, I didn't even mean to do that one. I didn't even mean to do knock it out of the park. They knocked it. I think they did something interesting here, and I think maybe what we are realizing with Evil Genius is maybe back in the day they were doing some revolutionary shit and like taking a step out of a comfort zone and going after some things, you know? But I think what they have kind of fallen into was they have a name. They are like recognizable. You talk about Philly craft beer, and you talk about some like long standing, tried and true. You got Evil Genius without question, and I
Sure.
think they may have stepped back and just said like, let's just make this kind of approachable because
Well,
that's
I can tell you Purple Monkey Dishwasher is taking a step back.
it's not as
I
good as it
used to
used
love
to be.
it. It doesn't taste the same. I don't know what it is,
Yeah.
but doesn't taste the same since I don't know since it was when,
Since
but
they started walking around Fishtown with baseball bats.
I think it was when they started going into the seltzer realm,
Oh god.
personally. Because anytime you start going into the seltzer realm, you lost me.
Except for two robbers, and then they stepped away from that, which makes no sense. Anyway, no!
The two rock the seltzer thing. Like they were seltzer. They weren't a brewery that did seltzer.
They were
They were
seltzer.
seltzer
They were a seltzery that did some beer.
in the seltzery. Sorry. So you wanted to what are you rating that beer then? The creamsicle orange bonanza beer.
Oh my god! If I gave there's no crying in baseball, maybe a 2.5. I would give this a three
So
and a
I
half.
got a rating.
I,
Okay, 2.5 on the first beer, 3.5 on the
yeah,
second. So
this is
you're right around it for the day.
yeah, this is a step above. You know.
Okay. I'm gonna give this a 4.25.
Wow.
This is really solid. This 4.25 is one of those. It's like the kind of like what I was saying earlier. I feel like its floor is a 4.
Mm.
On its best day, it's a 2.5, but it's probably somewhere in the middle of that.
Ooh, so you'd rather round up on this than round down?
Yeah, I think I generally round up. I think that's in general.
I think the
I
last
mean,
one you
that's
rounded down.
the last one I said.
You would have given
The
it,
last one I've said like it's a 4 on a good day, and
yeah,
it's a 3.5, probably more so
which is
normally.
which you would have given it like a 3.8, 3.9. So you did round
3.8,
down.
3. So I did round down, but I would have rounded like I check it in at a 4.
Oh, I thought you checked in at 4.25.
No, I checked in at a 4. The last beer.
Oh, okay.
I'm hanging around a 3.9, round up to 4.
Okay.
On this
I'm
one, I'm
sorry.
probably right on the edge between like 4 and 4.25. I'm like at a 4.125, a 4.125.
Very, very precise. 4.123.
Well, then I would round down to 4. That 1.25, we're halfway. We go up 2.5.
Um, yeah, that's very interesting. But transitioning, into the next part of this conversation, right? I'm awake. Um, transitioning into this next part of the conversation, right? So there are those that believe that this is kind of a step backwards, that it's not actually recognizing the Negro League for what it was. It wasn't built out of a cry to be included, but necessity because people were excluded, and therefore the desire was never to be part of these statistics, and therefore shouldn't be part of the statistics because they did their own thing better. They obviously those stats are there as a reckoning of what could have been, but I do find some fault in this, and that as personally. But I wanted to kind of hear your thoughts and feelings on these stats being included in the mindset of it wasn't to be included in the first place.
The reason the reason I will agree with including the stats is because the historical statistics are basically who did great in this sport at the professional level.
And it
And
was a
what this
professional
isn't,
level.
yeah, and what they're not saying is, or at least what I'm not saying, looking at it as, they're not saying the Negro League is now the MLB.
Because you
They're
can't.
saying the Negro League was on the same level as the MLB, and had it not been segregated back then, all of those players would have been playing against each other. So, in fairness, and to your point earlier, where they integrated a bunch of other leagues already in the past, this is in locks up with that, where they're saying, okay, well, these players belong. Plenty of those players played in that league also played in the MLB and did well. So it's clearly something that should be acknowledged. And I do think it does bring some light to the greatness of some of these players. It's There's no way to erase that history in my mind. Um, you're not going to go to Cooperstown and see them take down all of the Negro League stuff now and not talk about how this is not, this is just now this just was the MLB now.
Right.
It's not going to when because the one thing that doesn't change in all of this is you go back and you see who won the World Series in a particular year, who won the pennant in a particular year. You're not going to see the best Negro league team from that year, hold that position because they had a higher win total. All of those accolades still belong to those MLB teams. And so it forever will be segregated in that way. But this is just a way to show the individuals who played in that league the greatness that they had. And so it's not the same thing as a full assimilation.
And I think like
In my
what becomes very clear and very evident too, right? Like you have these like very clear distinctions, right? even like with interleague shit, right? Like, so one of the other things I was like listening to recently is about the shit show that's going on in Oakland, right, with the Athletics, right? And that whole mismanagement of the team, the fucking, if we're talking about capitalism, there it is, right?
Mhm.
And the fan base really like taking some offense to what's going on out there. And
They
so
should.
I was listening into several conversations about that, and they mirrored it to uh, Cleveland and the Browns, right? And when they were decidingly, I guess it was the early '90s to leave Cleveland, and the
Mm.
city rallied around in such a way that they were like, "Fine, fucking leave, but you're leaving the name of this organization here, and go ahead, become Baltimore, but the Cleveland Browns stay here, and we'll figure something else out." And that's exactly what happened. And so, fuck, I had a really good like. Oh, but if you actually are a NFL fan, if you actually are a fan of the team, the Cleveland Browns, if you're a fan of that team, you are able to make that distinction to say, hey, this was Cleveland, this is Baltimore. The same as you could potentially if you were a Ravens fan and say, this is the Ravens, this is the Colts, right? You can make
Right.
these distinctions of when certain teams are here, what this actually means, who you are a fan of, right? Am I a fan of Baltimore football? Am I a fan of Cleveland football? Am I a fan of the Browns? Am I a fan of the Colts? Right? Like, am I willing to watch this transition from here to here, or am I here? And I think if you are a fan of baseball and you just are looking at stats, and I think this is the other thing I will allude to, because I think this eventually does come back to beer, and I will bring it back to beer eventually. But I will
I'm
take a
forward to
next
seeing
step.
how you pull this one out of your ass.
I will take the next step, and I will bring this into to history, right? I'm going to take it into history. It's, we're seeing a lot of erasure of history, where we're seeing it be erased, that we're not willing to talk about these things that have happened. And if we're looking at baseball, it's very clear that there were these segregations and there was these things that happened where X, Y, and Z were not allowed to exist. Um, and so when we look at baseball and we add the stats of the Negro League, unfortunately, the reality is there are people that are going to be looking at the Josh Gibsons. And unfortunately, I don't have many other names to add to this list without having to look back into this. Unfortunately, I am aware of the Negro League, but I'm not aware of everybody's fucking name. But you're looking at the Josh Gibsons, you're looking at the Satchel Pages as like two of the more prominent names, right? And if a new baseball fan is looking through these statistics and everything like that, they're not looking at the statistics and being like, okay, that's the statistics, I'm done looking at the statistics. No, they're looking at, it's like, who is this Josh Gibson? And then they're going to go back and they're going to see the Negro League and they're going to see everything that happened there. And they're actually going to have an opportunity to learn something that wasn't actually presented to them, not something that is really taught or really explained about. And I liken that to the history of Tulsa. I liken that to shows like Watchmen, shows like Lovecraft that start off with these really impactful things that aren't really taught in school, that aren't taught in a way that is like, hey, this is how things were different and how this is really impactful and why it is important to understand that. And that's where the key thing is for me. It's not a whitewashing of history, it's not overlooking it, because if anything, it is making it what Florida doesn't want, what some of these other states don't want, that are very quick to say, oh, you can't like exclude Christ, but you can't include critical race theory into these education systems, because it's making you face the fact that a lot of these players who obviously have statistics that, yes, there are these nuances that don't necessarily line up with like the Bryce Harpers of what we know baseball to be, but arguably have shaped and crafted baseball to be now. And without that, it would be a very different story. And I think that is, for all the things that people may want to see the Negro League be recognized for, or I guess the I have a very particular description of why someone's mad about Jackie Robinson Day. For these exact reasons, it shouldn't be, oh, it could be so much better if we did this instead. It's, we're actually taking a step in the right direction. It might not be the best case scenario yet, but it is a stepping stone. Like, you should not be criticizing or stepping on something because it's not where we should be. And I have so much on it because it's like, we graduated from Reading High, a situation that to a lot of us in these like quote unquote upper classes, graduating high school is not the end all be all. But for a lot of people, graduating high school was the first time that that was kind of happening for people. And so to say, oh, we shouldn't be celebrating graduating high school because that's a bare minimum, that isn't fair. That's taking away from a lot of like celebration that should be celebrated. So saying, oh, the Negro League like shouldn't actually be done in this because it's taking away from everything they did. It's like, yeah, but the opportunity to highlight that is far greater, and you're stepping on that opportunity, and that makes no sense. We can get to a better place later, but to step on that, what the fuck?
What the fuck, man? Yeah, I do agree with you. I think they should be in the record books as is in a way that clearly highlights that they were part, because usually you're in the record books, you have like the team name, right? That you played for. Well, someone's going to see that. And to your point earlier, as kids, when if we were like looking up stats for some reason and we saw, oh, this guy's the league leader in hits right now, we're not going to go, cool. We're going to go to YouTube. We're going to type in highlights, this guy. And then you get to watch and see how they play. You get to, you might even become a fan of them, and then you're just gonna read up on them and stuff, and you're like, oh, well, I've never heard of this team called the Monarchs.
Right.
They're not a team now. Is that like some old team that changed its name? And then you go, oh, Negro League, what's that? So like, I think this is extremely beneficial to do it this way, is to highlight the achievement of these people, um, and to just have their names there, I think is a great step in the right direction. And to your point, maybe there is something better that could be done. Maybe there is more to do, but that needs to, like, the criticism needs to have like nuance to it.
Mm-hmm.
It can't just be, this is bullshit. They're trying to do this, this, and that, and then that's the end of the discussion. So what's the alternative? Would rather them do nothing, you'd rather them do nothing at all than something small and build off of that? Like, what is your angle?
Right.
So to just criticize it without a better idea, I think isn't good. And I also don't think leaving it the way it was is good either, because it still delegitimizes the Negro League.
Right.
Clearly, by all the people that are pissed off about this integration of stats, they clearly don't think that the Negro League belongs in the same conversation as the MLB.
And I think for that too, it's like for those that don't want, oh, so it's again bringing it up to the Tulsa thing, right? Too, like something that's not brought into like the like if it's not brought into the history books, and then it's just left to like figure out and understand on your own, right? There's a certain population that's going to learn and want to learn and find that information out, and then there's another population that just doesn't even know to look for that information, right? And I think that's the
Right.
other point too, is like if you don't know, or if you have no pathway into knowing that this existed, for a lot of people, it's not going to register until it's way too fucking late. And I think that's what blows my mind about it. I have to pee, but I want to bring this into another topic, and we'll do that as soon as we come back from the break. It's a 7th inning stretch. That's all I can say. All right, we're back. All right. So we kind of talked about both sides of this so far, right? We've talked about this like thinly veiled disguise of racism in terms of this shouldn't be allowed into the MLB, in
Uh-huh.
terms of the statistics, and then we also looked at it from a very like, this wasn't the Negro League wasn't built out of a desire to be a part of the league, but because we weren't invited, so why should we integrate these statistics? And so I think the way I always look at it is how can we tie this back into craft beer? And it's always
Yes, Tyler.
sometimes it's a stretch, Just trying to like build the
Stretch it. It
connection.
was a stretch at first, but
Exactly, stretch it first. But
give you the
the more I think about it, the more it kind of just highlights the importance of why I think we see, stuff like the National Black Brewers Association be created within the Brewing Association, right? Like you see these things happening, um, and it's not because it's outrightly what we say a lot of times. It's not outrightly exclusionary, but it's not intentionally inclusionary, right? Like we're running
very true.
into kind of the same thing. I think if it wasn't for certain people in baseball early on, the integration thing probably wouldn't be as bad. It still would have been bad. You still would have had those few actors, and it would have just went along at the same rate as race relations in the United States. I think what you saw as this difference is because of the people that were allowed to make these decisions, right? But what I see with beer is I see the need for almost a separation and for this like league of their own, right? Um,
Mhm.
because having that community and having those people around you, I think even you and I have benefited from it in a way to find common ground, to be able to have confidence within an area that isn't necessarily meant for you to be in. I heard this phrase used by a lot of people when they're talking about some of the early pioneers of baseball, especially black baseball, was heroes. And I think that's a very accurate description because it is brave to go into a world that isn't yours. Um,
True.
in such a way, and that's where I see baseball and I see beer really being a parallel like entity, is because it to not only like go into something that a lot of people don't expect you to be in, but then also your own people kind of like criticize you for being in sometimes. It is a very scary world and a very easy like community to then just kind of leave, especially not being able to see success. And we're talking about not being able to see loans in the same way as other people. There are very parallel like things that you have to kind of create. We talk about Pennsylvania black brewers all the time, and how two locals coming out and being the first black brewery from everything that we know.
Insane,
And I think
actually.
that is where the correlation is. It should be better than what we're seeing.
That's
And
true, yes.
to kind of it could be very easy for even the craft brewers association to not acknowledge this, and not to form something like the Brewers Association, and not acknowledge that this is actually needed in 2023-24, right? And to acknowledge that, and to kind of like say like, you know what, you might need this, and like in order for us to do better, which again comes down to green, this is what needs to happen. Because you're seeing again basically like what was happening at the MLB when they decided to start allowing people from the Negro League to come in, is you starting to see this recession. You're starting to see this scaling back of popularity of one thing, and in
Hmm.
order to hopefully bolster that community is where does the green exist? And it's going to be the black community, because the black community has always and will always have a large sway in what culture, but it will also have a economic sway as well. It can get muffled down, it can get repressed and everything like that, but it does have an actual influence and impact. And so this is where I see this like correlation, and that's where I thought this was a very interesting conversation, because if you don't acknowledge, and this is even going back into history then too, like all the black influence into crafting beer, having women crafting beer, all this other stuff, right? if you don't acknowledge these things and say that here we have always been part of this process, but then also acknowledge that we are probably going to need help, we are probably going to need a focus on this, and to actually, bring more awareness. If we don't do that, it's just going to be even harder. And I think that's where my train of thought was. It's a long train.
Got caught. Long train running?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You somehow brought it around to craft beer. Good job. I agree with all the points. I would say I would say that for in the craft beer space specifically, it is a little different in that like it's like an industry that's based off of obviously businesses participating in it.
Yeah.
Which there's this huge barrier of entry. And it's not unlike the barrier of entry into the MLB that black players face, which for black people that might want to enter into any type of small, cell phone business type of venture, huge barrier of entry,
True.
as compared to some of their counterparts. But for those that are able to do it, no matter how small or great they are in terms of success, in terms of their product or their performance on the field, um, they need to be recognized regardless. And I think that for me is the big point. Like, Two Locals is open now, and I hope them all the success. Regardless of how successful they are, they deserve their place in history for what they've done,
Yeah, 100%.
regardless. And the beauty of this versus a sport is it's really up to us and it's in our control to make them successful. Sure, they can continue to make good beer. They can continue to push the product forward, sure. But for a sport, you can only do what you can do. And sometimes sometimes an injury gets in the way, sometimes racism gets in the way.
Yeah.
And you can't do anything about that. But the beauty in the craft beer industry is we, the people, can we, the people, can make sure that these businesses are successful by going and supporting them. And so it's up to us as a community to get out and support these places, and to make sure that they go down in the history books, not just as the first to, or some of the first to do something, but also as just uh, a very successful part of this industry.
Yeah, I think you brought up a very. So if I was looking down and didn't look interested in what you were saying, I couldn't be further from the truth. I think you had said something that really struck a chord with me, right? And it's up to us, or we can have a lasting impact on how successful something can be, right? And unfortunately, I'm surrounded. Fortunately, I'm surrounded by a lot of craft beer, right here. Like, I'm in a very nice position. Unfortunately, Two Locals isn't that part of that community. When it first opened, I was in proximity enough, and I could force myself in proximity enough to be by it at least once a week, and I can't anymore, or I don't anymore. And so what I was looking at was, I walk about half an hour to work after driving about 10 minutes to work, right? I drive, park, and then walk. Because otherwise it's like an over an hour walk, which is close, but like that 10 minutes really makes a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. That 10 minutes makes up 20 to 30 minutes. It's key. Um, but with that being said, because I don't have to do it every day, but it would be nice to park closer to, it would be going out of my way to park closer to Love City. I mean, Love City. That's where I park close to now. To locals. I could drive there, park there, walk to work, walk back, and
Patron to locals.
that is an impactful like thing. Even if it is to get a beer a week, a 4-pack every other week, that is an impactful way, and they're right here, and there's not a reason that I
Something.
really shouldn't, you know.
Yeah, it's something. And if there's 20 more people like you
Right.
in that situation that can just maybe just take an extra step out of their way to make it happen,
Mm-hmm.
then there's another 200 because it's Philly, it's a massive city.
Yeah.
And so and that makes a huge impact over time.
And to
And
be
that's kind of what,
fair, my goal is to actually I'm since having left my previous role, my impact with students has gone down, obviously, because I don't get to interact with like the school age kids anymore. And so there is one student that I still try to mentor every couple of weeks, who is actually over in that direction. So if it made sense to just do that, like it's easier for me to jump on a Zoom with him because it's like by the time I would get there anyway, like at the earliest I can leave at 4. I wouldn't get over there until 5 anyway. But even then, like being able to do something in that direction, go home from there, but also be at 2 locals would be definitely worthwhile. But that is the point. It's the Negro League hasn't been around since when? I can't put a certain date on it, unfortunately. Like it's not something that sticks in my mind like that. But the thing is, the Negro League has always been at the forefront of my mind when it came to baseball after a certain age, because it was that like becoming aware of being black, being black and playing baseball. There is that correlation. There is that thing where whatever you're involved in while being black, you kind of know. Here is the history behind that. Here is when the first person got to do this, and then the first person got to do this. Like you kind of know that, versus
yeah,
that's not something that really exists when you're white, right? Like you're not really thinking about like that. The history of baseball. You might know the
exactly.
first baseball team, but it's not because it's the first white baseball team. Because it's the first baseball team.
Yeah, your identity in society isn't intrinsically linked
Mm-hmm.
to this. You can't point to this first person and go, this thing was the first thing of this type
Right.
of thing, because unless you have a family member for some reason that was like an immigrant back in the day.
Yeah.
Like other than that, like,
You don't
and
do
this is
that.
a completely different thing.
And so I guess,
To answer
yeah.
about the Negro League, 7 different Negro Leagues are being recognized
Yeah.
between 1920 and 1948. So
that's important. And I think on the other end of this too is in the weirdest way, I got back to looking at ancestry.com. There's a coffee company in Philadelphia called Ellis Coffee Company, right? And so on my mom's side of the family, the white side of the family, I started looking into, is there a possibility? Because I know on the white side of the family, we did come through Philadelphia at one point, and that was the Boyle, that was the Irish side. So it actually has no correlation to my side of the family. But because of thinking about that and knowing that I can trace my family back to like 3 different regions in Germany, I can trace us back to a region in Ireland, into the Czech Republic, right, into Hungary. I can trace us back to multiple different places in Europe, well into the early 1700s. On my dad's side of the family, I can trace my family back, both sides of my dad's, like my paternal and his paternal and his maternal. I can trace this all back to Virginia in the 1820s.
And that's the problem.
And so, what I
That's
will
the issue.
do is make a bigger effort to support what I can now. Because
There,
that's not always the case. There's not always that luxury of being able to go into this history of being able to say, yeah, we've done this for generations or anything like that, or we have this complexity of who we are. A lot of us, our complexity resides in the fact that we are African American. And so it is up
right.
to us to support us in the way that maybe we don't feel our ancestors holding us up. And so, we hold a heavier burden a lot of the times. And it shouldn't be that case. And I think that's exactly what this brings to light is, man, there's probably a lot of athletes that transcend all the way to Africa that like allowed Satchel Paige to be Satchel Paige.
Yeah,
And we'll never
it,
know.
it's and we'll never know. So we have to acknowledge what we can and acknowledge it on the absolute scale to the point that we can in this country.
Yeah.
Um, by supporting, by acknowledging. So that's all I have to say about that.
It really is. Um this more so than most, I feel, is an episode that could benefit from a lot of stats and numbers and factors that I also feel at the same time isn't needed because it seems clearer than most what the actual issue is. Um, and I'm actually, besides Trump getting found guilty, um, I would have found it very hard to find a particular topic to actually want to bring up and discuss this week. And so, in an odd way, this conversation came about in the best way possible. And that's weird, but I do find like most things, things happen for a reason, and I think this was a very particular reason. I think this is something that we were meant to talk about. We've talked about baseball a lot on this show, and I think it does really lean into a lot of the core principles behind why we started this. And so,
Yes.
no, it's cool. I found myself missing baseball lately, very much so. No.
Yeah, you should get into a slow pitch league, man.
If PHMC just would like put out a little blurb like, "Oh, we have a softball out of get me in." My knees don't work. I was never a fast runner to begin with.
My knees don't work. I'm not fast.
Mm-hmm.
It's fine. No, I do always miss baseball and like I do a softball league in the summertime every year since I started working for the state
Yeah.
or for DEP anyway, and it does scratch the itch just enough for me to not completely miss baseball to that point, because it was a huge part of our lives growing up, and so um, it is something to some kind of a void to try to fill, So that's why these baseball topics are always fun. It's a great game. It's quote unquote America's pastime, and it's about damn time that all of America gets to be put into the record books.
Yeah, I love that. But yeah, wow. I think we've discussed this well beyond maybe what was needed. But
Ad nauseum.
yeah, exactly. But I look forward to seeing what a couple weeks will bring. I will be in. I think I'll be in New England when we do that. So that will be a quick. I think we might have to shift over to Instagram if I don't figure out a way to do this remote. Um, but it should be good. I'm going to try to make some connections while up there, and it'll be fun. But until next time.
Peace.